Places like Yellowstone are famous for their stunning views, wild nature, and peaceful vibes. But James, a guy who loves camping, found out the hard way that beneath this nature lies something much darker. James and his friends were all about adventure. They'd camped pretty much everywhere across the US, always looking for the next remote spot. Nothing dangerous or unsettling had ever happened on their trips, just good times and great memories. But then, one summer in 2014, they went to Yellowstone, and even now, James shivers every time he recalls what happened that night. It all began like any other camping trip. They set up their tents by this beautiful lake with thick trees all around and a clear sky overhead. The plan was simple: hike up into the mountains, take in the views, and then return to their camp to enjoy a quiet evening by the water. After hours of hiking, they finally made it to the top. The view was incredible, endless trees stretching out below and the lake sparkling in the distance. It felt perfect, like one of those moments you don't forget. But while James was enjoying the view, one of his friends called out, urging the group to come look at something. At this moment, things started to get weird. James walked over to see what the fuss was about. What they found was unsettling. It was a horse skull, just lying there on the ground. No flesh, totally clean, like it had been sitting there for years. It was one of those things that's cool and creepy at the same time. James took out his phone to snap a few pictures, but he couldn't shake this weird feeling, like a mix of curiosity and dread. They shrugged it off as nothing more than a strange find and made their way back to camp. By the time they got there, they were exhausted and covered in dirt from the hike. Without thinking twice, they headed straight for the lake, diving into the cold water. But James didn't stick around for long. After a quick swim, he headed back to camp to dry off and get changed. That's when he heard it, a piercing scream coming from the woods. Not just any scream, but one of those gut-wrenching, bone-chilling screams that freezes you in place. When he got there, his friends were standing in a tight circle, dead silent, staring at something on the ground. James pushed through to see what they were looking at, and what he saw made his stomach drop. Right there, not far from their camp, was a dead horse. The body was fresh, still decomposing, with flies buzzing all over it. But the head, gone, completely missing. It was sickening to look at. James's mind immediately jumped to the skull they'd found earlier. Was it possible that it belonged to this horse? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. But that didn't make sense. The skull they found had probably been there for a long time. This body was fresh, still rotting. Something didn't add up. As they all stood there, frozen and trying to process what they were seeing, one of James's friends pointed to something nearby. A small, half-buried camera. James and his friends dug up the camera, and right next to it, they found a pile of negatives. But as they examined the photos, their worst fear was confirmed. The negatives showed pictures of the same decapitated horse lying right there in the grass. Someone had actually filmed it, but who would do that? And why? Whoever left that camera was probably still nearby, and they'd definitely come back for it. And what if they were out there, hiding in the trees, watching them at that very moment? Everyone was on edge, glancing over their shoulders like they expected someone to jump out of the shadows any second. They didn't waste any time. They grabbed their stuff as fast as they could, not even caring if it was packed right. Even though they were completely wiped from the hike earlier, they just kept moving, trekking for miles in the dark with only their flashlights to guide them. All they wanted was to get as far away from that place as possible, and fast. To this day, James can't shake the memory. He keeps asking himself the same questions over and over. Who would do something like this? And that skull, was it just a weird coincidence? Or was it all part of some twisted plan? The more he thinks about it, the more he realizes how close they might have been to something far worse. Even now, James has never talked about that night with his family, but he decided to share his story anonymously on Reddit, hoping to warn others. Because if there's one thing he knows for sure, national parks aren't just about the beautiful views and the wildlife. Somewhere out there are people with dark intentions, and sometimes you don't even realize you've stepped into their territory until it's too late.